All right, welcome everyone. My name is A.Tianna Scozzaro, and I am pleased to kick off today's webinar entitled A New Kind of Conservation, Making the Connections Between Community and Nature. Also want to introduce our three speakers today who are all actually Sierra Club members, as well as doing really impressive work in 3 different countries around the world. So first we have Chris Austria, who is a wildlife conservationist and photographer at the Ngamba Island Chimpanzee Sanctuary in Uganda. Founded in 1998 by Dr. Jane Goodall and a group of Ugandan trustees, the sanctuary is home to 46 orphan chimpanzees, and he'll share a little bit about his work and the work of the sanctuary. Karen Pitts is a world traveler, particularly in developing countries, and has observed people outgrowing their farms, their water supply, and their fuel supply. In 2000, she traveled to Bangladesh to witness its successful Green Umbrella Family Planning and Reproductive Health program, and has maintained a website called World Population Awareness since 1997. She is going to be sharing with us some of her volunteer work with a Masai community in Kenya. And Suzanne York has reported on international human rights, globalization, and environmental issues for 2 decades. She is director of Transition Earth, a project of Earth Island Institute that promotes human rights and nature's rights in a world of unsustainable growth. Previously, Suzanne was senior writer and director for the Institute for Population Studies, and she'll be sharing some of her work today with the Health and Harmony site based in Borneo in Indonesia. So with that, and before I want to turn it over to Chris, I just wanted to talk about the reason that we're having this conversation today. It is in the wake of a Congress that takes place once every 4 years that just last week convened over 8,000 conservationists, academics, scientists in Hawaii to really discuss what a planet at the crossroads looks like and what courses of action we need to take collectively to make sure that we create a sustainable future for many generations to come. I was one of those 8,000 attendees and was there with a particular interest in gender issues, and which is, as this screen highlights, an ongoing IUCN priority. And so really showcasing how women are disproportionately impacted by climate change and by natural disasters around the world, and how we need to be including gender into the conversation around conservation, climate change, and some of these other big environmental issues that the Congress was tackling. So what did that look like? There were many very impressive convenings of women that took place through a press conference featuring Indigenous women from Hawaii, from Alaska, from Peru, and other countries. Indigenous communities from Hawaii were also featured through some of our opening ceremonies that you see on the right. A gender caucus took place once every morning at 8 o'clock in the morning throughout the 2-week conference, and that was really an opportunity to engage one-on-one with other gender activists from around the world to really make sure that these important issues were being highlighted throughout some of the different sessions and conversations that we were having with others throughout the week. And then the last was storytelling. So on the right is a woman from the Solomon Islands that works with the Nature Conservancy, who, as you can see, brought a significant crowd of people to really hear directly from her the story of how she has been a leader in her community and the impacts that she's seen women and families face and what she's doing to combat that. So with that in mind, I think gender for me is at the heart of some of these intersections that we'll be talking about today, about women's reproductive health and rights, around sustainable development, and around how we can really think about community health and the health of the environment that we all rely on. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris to kick us off with a conversation about the Chimpanzee Sanctuary. So let me
on to the next slide.
Take it away.
Okay, great. Welcome everyone. My name is Chris Austria and I'm a wildlife conservationist and photographer with Ngamba Island Chimpanzee Sanctuary in Uganda. These are 3 of our beautiful chimps. We actually have 46 that are orphaned and have been rescued from the illegal wildlife trade. You see Tumba here in the middle. He's about 27 years of age. Chimps can live up to their 40s. We also have Minnie to the left and little Sarah to the right, and they're 7 years old. Next slide. Here's a picture of me with some of the caregivers. There are 8 caregivers, and Dr. Titus, one of the vets, is also here, and some of the staff. The Chimpanzee Sanctuary and Wildlife Conservation Trust is responsible for all aspects of the sanctuary, and they are an NGO in Uganda. Next slide. Uganda is also referred to as the Pearl of Africa because of its great beauty. Ngamba Island is located on Lake Victoria, which is Africa's largest lake. And you see on the map here is Entebbe. That's where our offices are located. And you travel by speedboat. It's about a 45-minute boat ride. You cross the equator to get to Ngamba Island. Next slide. We have 95 acres of pristine forest habitat for our chimpanzees. And the remaining 5 acres are for our guests. We do have a lot of guests and tourists that visit Ngamba Island. And also the vet clinic, the housing for the staff, and the food preparation area are located on these 5 acres. Next slide. Ngamba Island was founded in 1998 by Dr. Jane Goodall and a group of founding trustees. Next slide. Our mission is to promote the understanding, appreciation, and conservation of chimpanzees and their habitats. You see a photo of Pasa here. Pasa is about 17 years of age, and she was turned into Ngamba Island by a man who had purchased her illegally from a wildlife trader. Next slide. Our executive director is Lily Ajarova. She does a remarkable job in leading our organization, and here she is with Dr. Jane Goodall, who visits Uganda regularly. Next slide. We also work very closely with friendsofchimps.org, and they are an NGO here in the U.S., and their mission is to support Ngamba Island as well as chimpanzee conservation and other chimpanzee sanctuaries worldwide. They also do accept donations on behalf of Ngamba Island. Next slide. We are part of the Kume group of islands, and it's community development work that we're also deeply involved in, which is very important. Next slide. We have projects that support alternative livelihoods. Here you see beekeeping. We also encourage the planting of trees, nurseries, and we have sanitation and clean water projects. Next slide. This is my friend Silver Bilungi, and he is an education officer with the Chimpanzee Trust, and his mission is to teach kids about environment and about conservation so that they will be wildlife ambassadors. Next slide. A few facts about chimpanzees. We share 98.7% of our DNA with them. They are our closest living relatives. We are of the mammal order primate and in the same family, which is Hominidae. We shared a common ancestor and diverged from the chimps 5 to 7 million years ago. Chimps are not monkeys, they are great apes, and they do live in what we call a fission-fusion society, anywhere between 20 to 100 individuals. Next slide. Chimpanzees are an endangered species. Their population about 100 years ago was 1 to 2 million, and now they estimate maybe about 150 to 200,000 individuals. And chimpanzees are found on the west to east equatorial belt of Central Africa. Next slide. There are a few threats to chimpanzee populations. The bushmeat trade is one of them. And what hunters do is that they will use dogs and chase the chimpanzees through the forest and up trees with the dogs. They'll shoot the adults, take the adults and sell them on the bushmeat trade, and then take the infants and sell them on the pet trade. There's also a lot of habitat destruction for human settlements, logging, mining, as well as cutting down forests for cash crops such as sugarcane and tobacco. Because we are also so closely related to the chimpanzees, they can share many of our diseases, such as polio, the mumps, flu, influenza, and as you see the quote here by the Jane Goodall Institute, the bushmeat trade alone by itself could really eliminate the populations of African apes. So their conservation of their habitat is essential. Next slide. There is a burgeoning illegal wildlife trade, and unfortunately, these are the conditions that many of the chimpanzees are found in when they are rescued by the wildlife authorities. There is a large market for infant chimpanzees in China, the Middle East, and also Russia, and this is for disreputable zoos, circuses, laboratories, private collections. Next slide. And actually, you can play video. A.Tianna. Thank you. Instead of languishing in a filthy cage or chained to a tree, isolated in a laboratory, our chimpanzees, the 46 orphan chimps, live on 95 acres of forest habitat, and they live all here together as a community. The chimp that you see here in the middle is Pasa, who you saw earlier, and then to the left is Medina, to the right is Coco. Medina and Coco were rescued with 2 other chimpanzees from the South Sudan. They were rescued from an illegal wildlife trader who was going to take them to Khartoum and eventually to Egypt. Next slide. This is Ikulu. She's from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Ikulu was rescued by a Ugandan soldier. He found Ikulu clinging to her dead mother who had been killed during one of the wars in the Congo. When she arrived at the island, she was very traumatized and she would rock back and forth. But thankfully, because of the work of the caregivers, she was integrated into the community and is doing very well now. Next slide. And this is video, if you could see if this works. This is Clemmie. Clemmie was rescued by my friend Dr. Gladys Clemmie Zikusoka. She is the founder of Conservation Through Public Health, and she has also presented at Sierra Club webinars. And Clemmie is one of the dominant males. He's a contender for that alpha male position, but he likes to spend most of his time eating, and therefore he kind of ignores a lot of what's going around him. Next slide. And this is Sarah, who we saw earlier. Sarah is 1 year of age, or she was 1 year of age in this photo. Now she is 7. Next slide. And this is also video. Sarah is eating her favorite fruit here, which is jackfruit. There's not enough food and fruit in 95 acres to sustain the chimpanzees indefinitely. Therefore, we have to give them cut up fruit, and it does take about it costs about $135 a month to feed the orphan chimpanzees. Chimpanzees are frugivores, and therefore they rely on all the fruit and leaves from the forest in order to survive. Next slide. We also do a lot of conservation work in an area called Hoima, and you can see it on the map here. This is in western Uganda. These are all privately owned forests. They are not protected by national parks or preserves. There's a very healthy chimp population there, and it's very important to maintain these forest corridors in order to keep the chimpanzee population going. And we work in partnership with the forest owners and really encourage them to conserve the remaining forests. Next slide. Education is really important, and especially for the youth. When I was growing up as a kid, my parents exposed me to a lot of nature activities, and it had a deep impact on me. The Kiamalila Wildlife Education Center is here in Hoima, and they teach conservation to the youth using arts, dance, and drama. Next slide. A couple weeks ago, there was a Children of Conservation Festival, and there were a lot of environmental educational activities. Conservation and community development is really inextricably entwined. They cannot survive without each other. They work hand in hand. And empowering the youth to become change agents is really very crucial. And there's a Change My Community education program, which includes vegetable growing, tree planting, and the use of energy-saving stoves. And it's really about teaching the youth the importance of nature and sharing the planet with the animals that exist with us. Next slide. This is Henry Biarufu. He's a forest manager. And we have a tree planting program. And a couple years ago, there was 61,000 seedlings distributed to 118 forest owners. And it's really the job of the Chimpanzee Trust to work with the community and really encourage sustainable farming and encourage them to replant in areas where trees have been cut down. And many of the forest owners, they realize this importance, and they have really refrained from cutting down the forest for cash crops such as sugarcane. Next slide. As I mentioned, it's important that the community become conservation partners with us, and we have a monitoring program in the Itoya Forest. There's a very healthy population of chimpanzees here, and the community is directly involved with going to the forest, checking the camera traps, counting the chimpanzee nests. Chimpanzees make a new nest every single night where they sleep, and that's a great way to determine how their population is doing. And there's also intervening in wildlife and human conflicts. But sustainable conservation strategies are really only achieved by working with the community and having programs where they are directly involved. Next slide. I had the honor of meeting Lillian Tikasimile last year. She took us through her forests, which are really extraordinary and very beautiful. And I was really inspirited to talk with her because she was so motivated to protect her forests, and she really cared about the chimpanzees. And she actually told us a story that there's a male chimpanzee that always visits her while she's planting her crops. And she will tell him, go ahead, go up, and he'll go up the tree. He actually waits for her permission. He'll take the fruit from the tree and go down to the ground, eat half the fruit, and leave the rest of the fruit for her. It was really a pleasure to speak with Lillian and to meet her family. Next slide. Chimpanzees are what we call a flagship species. When you protect them, you also protect their biodiversity and other species that live alongside of them. Next slide. And I would love to keep in contact with everybody. I'm on Facebook and Twitter at Chris Austria, Instagram at Christopher Austria. You can also go onto my blog. I have a section for Ngamba Island at chrisaustria.com. Next slide. And you can also go to my website, chrisaustriaphotography.com. Next slide. If anyone is interested in making a donation for the care of the chimpanzees, or if you're interested in adopting a chimp, please visit ngambaisland.org. And you can also visit friendsofchimps.org. Thank you very much. Thank you, A.Tianna, and everyone who has attended the webinar.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris, and what beautiful photos, too. With that, we will have an opportunity for questions at the end. So with that, I want to move on to Karen to speak a bit about the Masai project. Karen, let me just... Oh, there you go. Karen, over to you. Thanks.
Hi. The Masai Harmonial project serves the Imberbe community located at the orange dot down in the inset. And this community is located in Tanzania in the Ngorongoro Conservation Area in a geographical feature known as the Imberbe Depression. Nearby is the famous Ngorongoro crater at the bottom, and the Serengeti at the top left, and the Mount Kilimanjaro at the right. Next slide. Next slide. Can you hear me? Okay. These are pictures I took while on safari in Tanzania. The jumping Masai at the bottom right are from the Imberville community. The initiator of this project is a Masai ranger serving in Ngorongoro. He recently Skyped me from the Ngoi Tokitok spring where you see the hippos in the upper right picture. In Ngorongoro, the Masai lived in harmony with wildlife and the environment. But, next slide, that is not the case today. Cattle and grazing wildlife are competing for forage as human numbers increase. Masai are no longer allowed to live in the Ngorongoro crater. The Masai in the Ngorongoro conservation area are not allowed to cultivate. The conservation area authorities are talking about making families leave the area. To top it off, a volcano spewed ash which killed most of their cattle in 2008. Next slide. In February, my partner, Ben Parks, went to Tanzania to meet Mapena, a former student that Ben had sponsored in Wildlife College. When Ben arrived at Mapena's village in the Ngorongoro Conservation Area, they had a big ceremony, and most of the village turned out. The village elders presented Ben with a list of the community's challenges, and a woman stood and asked for family planning, to my surprise. Next slide. Problems. Since they are not allowed to cultivate, women have to go 70 kilometers to buy maize, rice, and produce for their family, as you can see in the picture. Women often have to travel 8 miles round trip to get water and firewood. They have to go 70 kilometers to give birth and to get health care and family planning, and when they get there, they need an interpreter. Many men do not want family planning. Women wean their babies at only 3 months due to little space between pregnancies. Women want small business but lack opportunity for loans and business training. Girls are married as early as age 12. Many men have many wives, and in some cases up to 50 children. Female genital cutting is practiced. Not many girls go to school. The water is polluted with mud, cattle dung, and human waste, and there is often not enough water. The village schoolhouse has the roof falling in and only one book. The cattle get no tick or worm treatment, and many of them were killed by volcanic ash. So men, too, need an alternative livelihood. The Conservation District is threatening to remove people from the Ngorongoro Conservation Area because there are too many cattle for the area. Next slide. This is our team. Mapena is the initiator of the project and is a visionary for his people. He has connection and is honest and transparent. Grace registered herself for school without her parents' permission. Sometimes they would let her go to school, and sometimes you had to stay home. She will be going to health college in October and promises to be a big sister to the young girls who will be going to boarding school not far away from her college. She has acted as an interpreter for the Masai women at Fame Medical Center. She is very interested in family planning. Samuel is the village coordinator. He is the one who talked to the women about family planning, investigated the water supply for Ben, and gathered the village together to talk about the new constitution, birth spacing, and sending the village and girls and boys to school. Ben is an engineer, a sustainability guru, the water system guru, the career guidance mentor, student sponsor, and a traveler in the developing world. Karen, that's me, is the project facilitator, the family planning and reproductive health guru, the web guru, developing world traveler, and a donor to the girl students. Next slide. Water. Ben has found that there is an existing water system, but it is poorly maintained. With cooperation on water maintenance and water conservation from all of the villages using the system, there will be enough water to ensure that women will not have to go so far to get it. Once the mud is eliminated from the water, then water purification can be added to the system. Community-based organization. Using a model constitution, I was able to add gender equity and youth representation and also open the door to a community-wide conversation about ritual cutting. Once they get the Constitution, they can accept money from donors. Future projects. Also on our schedule are youth programs with Marie Stopes, educational smartphones, women's and men's development, the village school, a cow tick dipping station, and school incentives for girls. Next slide. Family planning. Since June, we have sent 28 women, 10 midwives, and 18 women with babies to Fame Medical Center for family planning training. In late August, I discovered that the NGO Marie Stopes was coming to a nearby village with transient family planning clinic. 13 women from Imberville and 10 women from nearby villages went to the clinic and got hormonal implants. Long-acting birth control lasts for 5 years. The women from neighboring villages went because Samuel spread the word to the leaders of the other villages. School. On September 6th, I young girls in English boarding school. I am sponsoring Grace in Health College starting in October. Lindiapa, Mepena's brother, will be going to veterinarian school sponsored by Ben. Also, the villagers agree to send all the children age 8 and above to a nearby free boarding school. I feel that school will keep a lot of girls out of early marriage. Next slide. Promotion. Oh, I guess I'm off by one. Culture, language, and poverty can be barriers to reaching a mutual understanding. There is no doubt that there are many things that we will never know as privileged people about the Masai or any other foreign. I frequently found that the locals will let you hear what you want to hear, and if you get it wrong, they may neglect to correct you. But people are not afraid to tell you what they think in comments on the Masai Harmonial Facebook page. Success of the project is dependent on having someone that you can trust to tell you the truth. Humor is important in breaking the ice, especially sight gags, as in this picture of Pauline, a volunteer from the Fame Medical Center, kidding around with the Masai women. To be more accurate in determining a community's status, you need to be open-minded and never condemn. Ask multiple choice questions to allow them to say it the way it really is. Ask their opinion on everything you do for them, and be cautious about making assumptions. I assumed that it didn't matter whether Masai was spelled with 3 A's or 2. From my self-perception of superiority in the English language, I got it wrong. I learned this after already having named the website and Facebook page erroneously. Language differences and accents cause many misunderstandings. It is helpful to reword your questions or ask from a different angle if something they say seems to be odd. When working with people who speak English as a second language, spoken communication such as phone or video is easier and more accurate than written such as email or messaging. Iniquity of wealth requires caution. Give sustainably and give where it will do the most good. When you can't give enough for everyone to benefit, let the community set the criteria for giving. Tell them that you only have so much to give. An example of cultural differences is in sending girls to school. Mapena wanted to send girls ages 5 to 7 to English boarding school, and I wanted to send ages 8 to 11. The thing is, I have to trust Mapena to make the best decision. We can find an example of being culturally sensitive in the country of Senegal, where the NGO Tostan tackled the very sensitive tradition of female genital cutting. We can start by not saying female genital mutilation, which would be condemning a practice that the women who practice it think of as an act of love. The abandonment of FGC was done by educating women about health and their rights, facilitating community-wide conversations about the good and harm of the tradition, and getting agreement from doctors and religious leaders. Next slide. Let me find my place here. Promotion, making it happen. Much of our success depends on NGOs. Boarding schools can be funded by sending money directly to the school. When the community-based organization is registered with the government, funding can go directly to the organization. We are fortunate that we have talented volunteers on the ground and also volunteers in the U.S. with skills that just happen to be helpful in many ways. An international safari and cultural fundraising trip is planned. Funding will be needed for building of the village school, a cattle dip station, incentives for girls going to school, and startup funding for women's small business. Volunteers. Many of the followers on our Facebook page are interested in the project, and we already have one prospective volunteer. Thank you so much for listening.
Fantastic. Thank you, Karen. And such impressive work, particularly in what I know has not been a very long amount of time. So your volunteer spirit is really making a difference. So thank you for sharing that. With that, we'll turn to the final speaker before turning it over to questions. So Suzanne, over to you.
Thanks, A.Tianna, and thanks to everyone for taking the time to join our webinar. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about a small innovative health clinic in Borneo that's using what's called the PHE model, or Population Health and Environment Model, which is an integrated approach to development as a way to empower communities and protect nature. And this particular organization I'm going to talk about calls their project Saving the Rainforest with a Stethoscope. Next slide, please. Before I jump in about the clinic, just a little bit about the Population Health and Environment Model. It's really about linking conservation and health initiatives, and it's looking at healthcare and family planning and equity issues, just ways to empower people with livelihoods and women in particular, but also providing natural resource management and education in a lot of different forms, not just sending kids to school, but how do you live sustainably within your environment. And in Borneo, the clinic that I'm going to talk about is called Alam Sehat Lestari, better known by its acronym ASRI, and is a partner with Health and Harmony, a US-based organization. And ASRI and its founders refer to their work as I mentioned, saving the rainforest with a stethoscope, because they saw the importance of linking conservation and health. And I visited ASRI last year with A.Tianna on a Sierra Club delegation, and they're truly doing amazing work in Borneo. Next slide, please. Borneo is the third largest island in the world, and it's comprised of Indonesian Borneo, which is referred to as Kalimantan, and also part of Malaysia and the Sultanate of Brunei. There are a lot of pressures in Borneo right now, especially environmental pressures. Deforestation is the biggest problem. Indonesia has a lot of tropical forests, and it represents some of the most diverse habitats on the planet. Unfortunately, according to many conservationists, Indonesian Borneo, or Kalimantan, is losing forest cover equivalent to a football field every day. And there are many endangered orangutans that live in Borneo that are threatened. In fact, orangutans have lost 55% of their habitat in just the last 20 years. Much of this deforestation is spurred by illegal logging to support the paper and pulp industry, but mostly for palm oil plantations, especially in the last decade. So much forests have been cleared in Indonesian Borneo for palm oil plantations. And you have companies doing this, but you also have regular farmers that are using slash and burn techniques. And unfortunately, this exposes a lot of peat soil, which is very flammable. And about this time of the year, Indonesia starts having really bad forest fires. You may have heard on the news last year how bad it was. The air pollution was impacting not just Borneo, but Java and Singapore and even Malaysia. And our delegation got there just a few weeks after the forest fires had subsided, but you could still kind of sense it in the air, and it was a big threat to people as well as, of course, to nature. And other threats include there's a lot of mining that goes on, erosion, poaching of orangutans, birds, and other species, dams, and then, of course, poverty is a big problem for many people in Kalimantan. Next slide. So ASRI was founded in 2007 by 3 women. They employed a technique called radical listening, where they spent hundreds of hours in this particular community of Sukadana, listening to the locals about what they needed. And it was spurred by a woman by the name of Dr. Kinnery Webb, who originally went to Borneo to study orangutans as a biology student, and she realized that there was no way that you could really protect orangutans when there was so much human pressure spurred by poverty, and people in particular really had a need for health care. So Dr. Webb went back to the U.S., decided to become a doctor, and then again returned in 2007 with 2 other people and founded the Austria Clinic. And to underscore what the people were telling them, again, they really wanted an end to poverty, but most importantly, they needed access to affordable health care. That was key. They just couldn't deal with any other problems if they weren't able to take care of their children and their family. So they emphasized the need for affordable health care and then mobile clinics, because there's so many rural areas that people can't access the clinic from because of when it rains, the dirt roads turn to mud and it's very hard to travel. So they wanted mobile clinics, and they also wanted organic farming. Next slide, please. And the Austria founders heard this. They founded Austria, and healthcare was their initial main concern. And they work, again, with Health and Harmony in the U.S. to establish this clinic and bring healthcare to people. And Health and Harmony has fostered a global exchange of medical experts that leads to quality care. So there's a kind of a doctor-to-doctor peer work that takes place at the clinic when doctors from abroad come to visit and work with their counterparts in Indonesia. And at the Sukadana Clinic, they provide medical and dental services. Most importantly, they provide a variety of options for people to pay for this service. Of course, they can pay with cash, but if that's not a possibility for someone, they can pay with handicrafts, they can volunteer their time, they can pay with seedlings, they can even pay with manure. The Austria Clinic will be expanding. I believe in October they're opening a community hospital and training center. So they're really ramping up their work in this area. One thing that I found really inspiring about the clinic was they took advantage of people waiting for their appointments in the waiting room and did educational presentations. When A.Tianna and I were there, they were doing a presentation on IUDs. And somebody, next slide please. One of the nurses there was demonstrating how to use an ID to, chuckles in the audience, but people were listening, so it's a really innovative approach to, take care of having a captive audience. So they have a lot of education on family planning. Condoms are available throughout the clinic in baskets where nobody, questions if you take a condom or not. Injections are the most popular form of contraception right now. In this part of Kalimantan, midwives told us that people have an average of 2 to 3 kids, and sex ed is available in high schools. But the midwives felt like spacing births was really important, and they wanted to emphasize that as a key way to manage family planning and the health of children. Next slide, please. So in addition to healthcare, conservation is a really big part of what Austria does. They border a national park called Gunung Palung National Park, home to 2,500 orangutans. And again, this is a park that the locals had initially done a lot of illegal logging in order to pay for health care. So, Austria has come in and really educated people on the importance of protecting this community and providing sustainable livelihoods and alternative forms of payment for health care so they can protect these 2,500 orangutans. They do a lot of work and education around reforestation. Again, I mentioned people could pay with seedlings, and these are replanted in a reforestation effort that Austria undertakes locally. And let's see what else. Last year they had 3,500 seedlings that people use for paying for healthcare services that they have planted in the area. And so again, people are sometimes paid to do this, and sometimes they volunteer. And then, of course, Austria has staff that does this. And the man in the upper left photo was a former palm oil plantation worker who's now been working for Austria for a number of years around conservation. Next slide. Another innovative program that's been started by Austria is its Forest Guardians program. This is a way to track illegal logging taking place in the park and surrounding communities. They have recruited currently about 34 forest guardians in their local villages to track how much illegal logging is going on. These particular forest guardians, they speak the local dialects, or from the area, people trust them. They also act as a bridge between the community and Austria, so they can smooth over any questions or concerns that people might have. And Austria, one of their founders, instigated a program called Green and Red Villages, where the forest guardians determine how much illegal logging is taking place in the villages. So if they've stopped illegal logging, they're deemed a green village and they get about a 70% discount on health care. If they've decreased logging but it's still going on, then they're termed a red village, where they get a little bit of a discount, but there's an incentive there for them to actually stop the illegal logging overall, so they can get a much more greater discount on health care and find alternative livelihoods. And it's just their way of helping people access the clinic and educate them on sustainability initiatives. Next slide. Austria does a lot of work around educating the local youth. The picture on the upper right, local school kids that are taken out to learn about composting and organic farming and the importance of nutrition and growing healthy vegetables for families. They also take the local kids, of course, to the National Park Gunung Palung, which is, again, in their backyard, but they will also take about 150 kids a year to a national park that's about an hour or so flight away. That's home to an orangutan research, or a station where you can see orangutans come in, a feeding station. So they're assured of seeing orangutans, and they learn a lot more about why it's important to conserve their local forests and forests overall in Borneo and around the world, and why, how communities can benefit from this. Next slide, please. And lastly, another great program that we heard about is called Goats for Widows. It's a way to empower a marginalized community of widows in Sukadana that once they become widows, they may not have income coming in, and so Austria devised this program where goats are provided. They provide income for these women and their families because they can sell the manure or use the manure for health care. They can sell the goats or the goat's milk or use them for breeding purposes. And local organic farmers often buy the goat manure to use as fertilizer from the widows. Next slide. So that's just a really quick overview of the conservation health approach in Kalimantan through the Austria Health Clinic. I believe there's a lot of potential PHE as a replicable model to apply in communities around the world. It's a holistic approach. It's really about empowering people and communities to do the best for their local environment and do the best for their own families. It's a way to conserve resources and promote human rights and ultimately protect our families and our communities. Next slide. And if you want more information, my contact information is up there. It's Suzanne at transition-earth.org. And thanks to the Sierra Club for the delegation to Kalimantan last year.
Great. Thank you, Suzanne. And what a marvelous spread of stories from Uganda, Tanzania, and Borneo. Very impressive work that each of you are pursuing and supporting. So thank you very much for sharing. With that, we'd love to turn it over or open it up for questions. You can either chat a question in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, or feel free to raise your hand, I believe, as I'm not sure about how to unmute everyone altogether. So feel free to raise your hand and I can unmute you one by one to ask your question. Thanks. Great. We have a question from Adam. Adam, please go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering, what's the interface between the NGOs and the Indonesian government in terms of working together? Is there any, or is it just this independence? Or I just wondered how much grouping together and working together happened, as opposed to just kind of us coming in and doing the thing as Sierra Club and Transition Earth doing the thing. So I just wondered what's the cooperation with the Indonesian government and a broader sense of conservation.
That's a good question. I'm not sure I'm the best position to answer that. I'm sure there's some good relationships between NGOs and the government, but the government, my understanding, has supported a lot of these palm oil plantations, so there's that conflict between NGOs like Greenpeace coming in to halt palm oil plantation, or others that work on so-called sustainable palm oil, and then the government that's kind of allowing these corporations to just come in and take over and clear forests. Yeah, I'm not really sure, Adam.
And this is A.Tianna. I would add as well that in terms of the Austria Clinic being a local nonprofit and how they engage with the local government, the health clinic provides health care to a community that might otherwise not have health care because there's no hospital in the region nearby. And so Austria is actually looking to expand and has broken ground on a hospital right next to their clinic to serve in complement to the Indonesian government's healthcare, to provide additional healthcare through their own services. So I think that relationship is very supportive. And then the Sierra Club's capacity in going to visit that site last year was really in a learning mission to learn about what work like this, innovative, integrated work, can look like on the ground, and help tell those stories and elevate and amplify those messages of success through our networks back in the United States. So, yeah.
Sounds good. One last question is, are Malcolm Potts and Martha Campbell working on the Depo-Provera for the injectables, or what injectables are they using? And that's the last thing I'll ask.
That is a good question, Adam. I'm not in a position to answer that. That's not, we don't work directly with Malcolm Potts and those folks, and I don't believe they're connected with any of these organizations either. Thanks. Any other questions? I don't see any raised hands. Feel free either in the chat or Richard, did you have a question? Oh, I see. There's a questions box. Well, you all are one step ahead of me. Apologies. Okay. Great. So we have a few questions. I'll start from the top. Kara Honzak from Pathfinder International has a question for Suzanne. She says, it sounds like the project is doing wonderful work, and so her question is that the discount healthcare promoting conservation has been a complicated one, and how has the project dealt with that aspect of being a barter system for healthcare, and how does the Ministry of Health, for example, support those kinds of health services?
Thanks, Kara. Those are really great questions. They've had a lot of success with the discount method. I don't know exactly how the government is responding to that. There's some complications between government healthcare and the healthcare that Austria in particular is providing, or NGOs and non-governmental organizations providing healthcare. So I'm not really in a position to, I'm not an expert on the Austria program. I can only direct you towards Health and Harmony in the U.S. or the Austria Clinic's website for more details. I think that they're seeing a change in the community that before they weren't able to access healthcare, and then having these options has brought more people in, even through this green versus red designation for villages that's been positively received by the population.
Great, thanks. I see another question here from Richard Grossman for Karen regarding the contraceptive implants in particular, and sometimes it being difficult to remove those by local healthcare providers. Is that something that you have found in your conversations with the community you work with, Karen?
Yeah, so I was concerned about that when the women went for family planning, but they come every 3 months. So I think if they had immediate problems, they could go to FAME, which is 70 kilometers away. They go there for health care anyway, to have their implant removed if they have problems. Or if it's not urgent, they could wait for 3 months until Marie Stopes comes back.
Great, thanks. There's a comment in here from Gladys saying, thank you for spreading the word about these great projects. Thank you, Gladys, for joining us. Any other questions, comments? I see we also have a lot of experts who have joined us as well, who I'm sure could, lend their own perspective to this conversation as well.
This is Karen again. My website is masaiharmonial.org. The Masai spelled with M-A-S-A-I instead of the right way, which is 2 with 3 A's. Anyway, you can go to its blog and subscribe to follow our progress.
Are we still live, A.Tianna?
I don't hear anything.
Oh, so sorry about that. I was talking and muted. Yeah, just wanted to say thank you once again to Chris, Suzanne, and Karen for sharing your insight and expertise today. Without seeing any more questions, we want to go ahead and wrap up. This webinar will be recorded, and so we will be sharing it in its entirety online following the webinar for anyone who was not able to join us today. So again, thank you everyone for joining. Thank you to our speakers, and enjoy your afternoon. Look forward to continuing this conversation online. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
A.Tianna.